very much.
Everybody. And a big thank you to the product school team. It's been a real privilege to be here today, hearing people talk with such creativity and passion about how they've solved problems. And hopefully I can add a little bit to that journey today. I'm going to be talking to you today about how we evolved Deliveroo from its early focus to a multi-vertical marketplace, and what we did to evolve the delivery network to help us get there. Before we get into that, though, just a little bit about Deliveroo and a little bit about me. So most of you, I'm sure, ordered dinner last night on Deliveroo, got your breakfast this morning, your breakfast groceries with Deliveroo, and you've got some DIY lined up at the weekend with a scheduled order from us. But for those of you that don't know us, a few kind of tidbits about Deliveroo. So firstly, we operate in 10 markets. We've got 7 million monthly active customers across those markets. And what we do across those markets is connect those consumers and their needs with merchants and riders. So we have 186,000 and change merchants on the platform, and around about 135,000 riders. And we bring all of those three sides of the marketplace together to help serve consumers and the missions that they're coming to the platform for. And in amidst that, I lead the rider side of the marketplace. And what we're really trying to do is give consumers the best possible service experience at a cost that is palatable for the business. So promises that you see on the platform around the speed with which your order is going to be delivered, the fulfillment of that promise, i.e. you actually getting what you've ordered, and the communication with you in terms of kind of how that is progressing, that's all kind of problems that my teams are involved in solving. But obviously sitting beneath that is a whole bunch of complexity. So how many riders do you need at any one point in time to fulfill consumer orders? How do you price orders in a way that is going to be attractive to riders such that consumers get what they order? How do we communicate all of this to customers? I think that kind of mix of problems is what makes this a really fascinating space and keeps me energized to be solving problems in this area. So a little bit about me before we get started. So I cut my teeth in products coming out of the financial crisis at around about the time when the Kindle and the iPhone were sort of first coming out, and kind of we were thinking, how do we navigate this transition in the books world? I wasn't that excited about ebooks, if I'm honest. I think it was kind of a sort of interesting way to help consumers carry more of the product, but actually I didn't think it was particularly transformative. What I was really excited about was audiobooks, and the ability for audiobooks to really unlock more listening and reading time for consumers, and to help bring new users into books, new readers into books in a way that hadn't been done before. So I moved on to work at Audible, and worked on a few different problem spaces there. Early days was sort of kind of innovating in different types of content subscriptions. So sci-fi and fantasy, can you develop a particular product for consumers of those genres? Romance, obviously, kind of a massive genre. Could we do something specific there? But then I also progressed out into international expansion. And one of the kind of fascinating things that I worked on during that time was launching Audible in India. It was around about the time of the demonetization back in 2016. Anyone familiar with that will know that that was a kind of very rapid moment of change. You had a bunch of banknotes pulled from circulation that drove very rapid adoption of different types of payment method. And so kind of unwillingly at the time, I became a bit of an expert in payments, and kind of that became my thing for a long time. That brought me into Deliveroo. And so my first sort of role at Deliveroo was helping scale out the payments horizontal that we had at the company, helping evolve how we handled money movement and thought about the proposition for consumers, riders, and restaurants. After a couple of years, I was sort of interested in getting back into a growth space, and so moved into the grocery area at the time, which was kind of experiencing some rapid growth as part of the pandemic. And then finally, last 8 to 10 months or so has been on the rider side, and it's kind of really these two last spaces that I wanted to talk about today. So how do we go about thinking about diversifying into these new verticals at Deliveroo? And then how do we evolve the delivery network to do that? So, there's a bunch of people involved in this. I was one part of a wider team solving problems in those spaces. But I thought it'd be interesting to sort of bring that story together for you all today. So this is where we started from. Our original mission was to feed people 3 times a day, and it's a pretty powerful mission. It's also kind of a business that can be very large, right? We're already quite a large company in terms of fulfilling that mission, but we've still got loads of runway to go in terms of just fulfilling that core consumer promise. Now, that was kind of what we were doing from about 2012 to 2019, and kind of in 19 we'd started doing some early trials of groceries. So we worked with Co-op in the UK. For anyone that doesn't know Co-op, sort of a large convenience-based grocer in the UK. And kind of we'd seen a bit of growth there, but it wasn't really kind of flying. Fast forward, 6 to 8 months into wave 1 of the pandemic, and we saw this massive organic growth on the platform. And we also saw consumers buying things that we never kind of imagined might be possible at that time. So we obviously had the sort of core use case that Deliveroo was serving at the time. You added on a range of groceries into that mix, and sort of the set of things that consumers were willing to buy evolved over time. So they might come in and their first purchase would be, some emergency milk and bread. Over time, we saw them evolving into fresh lines and various other things. People were also using us for their emergency pharmacy needs, and some of them were even buying flowers on the platform. So we faced into this and asked ourselves, how should we navigate this evolving set of missions that consumers are using the platform for? We could continue going deep on our core business, on hot restaurant food, or we could kind of scale out into these additional verticals as well. And really, like the answer to any key strategic question, where we landed on that was, let's actually do all of these things. But kind of, I think the sort of question for us was, how big do you go, and how wide and how deep on each of these different vectors do you go? So fast forward a couple of years, and we landed on this really inspiring mission for where we go next, which is to transform the way that consumers shop and eat by bringing the neighborhood to your door. And that sort of represented the evolution of a couple of years' work on this. But in the early days, we had some much sort of more core questions to answer, which were, how do we position ourselves in these new verticals, specifically grocery? What are the missions and basket sizes that we go after? And how do we differentiate ourselves in those spaces in a world in which consumers have access to a whole variety of ways to solve these problems? So we did 2 things to try and answer that question. One was we looked at structural trends in the way that this industry was evolving, and the other was we went very deep on consumer pain points. So consumer pain points of consumers that weren't using our service for grocery already, consumer pain points of the existing users of the platform, and what they were telling us, and kind of through that evolved a thesis for differentiation. Now, talking about the kind of first lens that we used there, structural trends. Now, there's a multi-decade shift in the UK, in Europe, in most markets to more shopping trips per week. And you kind of see this if you look around, the area around the Barbican here. You've got a Tesco Express down the road, you've got a Sainsbury's local, you've got all of these kind of small convenience-based formats for people to pick up their groceries. And so this is something that's been going on for several decades, right? Consumers have less time, they have more options, and so they're shopping more, and the basket sizes are getting smaller. And the question for us was, how do we plug ourselves into this platform, to this structural shift in a way that is attractive to consumers? And really kind of, we're actually ideally placed to serve this sort of mission, right? It's a kind of on-demand top-up shop. We believe it will scale over time, but ultimately kind of we're well placed to play a role in serving that fundamental consumer need for convenience. So sort of looking at this sort of macro shift over a period of time married quite nicely with the way that our own business was evolving organically. And the second thing we looked at was, what are the consumer pain points that are needing to be solved by people using these sorts of services already, and what are existing consumers telling us that they need us to help solve for them? So, you've got all of the kind of likely suspects on here. Freshness. Am I going to get fresh avocados if I order them on Deliveroo, or are they going to try and give me the ones that are kind of very ripe and likely to go off in the next 24 hours? Is this going to be am I going to get the same value when I buy these products on Deliveroo as if I went to the store and looked for it? Am I going to get the same loyalty program if I order on Deliveroo? Will the range be the same? Will I be able to satisfy the mission that I'm coming into the platform to try and fulfill? And then finally, and this one was really the sort of major pain point by, I would say, a country mile. So you're talking about over 50% of consumers telling us this, is really a broad bucket around reliability. And there's a few different things that go in that bucket. One is, am I going to get all the products that I order, right? So anyone that's done online grocery shopping previously knows that, often it's a game of Russian roulette as to whether you get everything you'd ordered. Often the quality of the substitutes doesn't necessarily match up with what you're wanting. So known problems that we had to invest in solving. One really interesting part of that we hadn't thought a great deal around was, in a world where consumers are used to seeing delivery riders with small backpacks bringing small takeaway meals to them, they didn't trust that we would actually be able to bring a large basket of goods to them and do it in a way that was reliable and met the service promise that we offered them. So this kind of proposition around what we call large orders, i.e. bringing a 30 to 40 to 50 pound basket of groceries to consumers, that was a real problem that we had to solve. So we hit on one of the core pain points we were going to address as being, can we be the best provider of large orders in the market? And I'll talk a little bit about what we did to solve that one. Before I do that, though, just a word on what this actually is. So lots of ambiguity around this, but essentially, we call a large order anything that is too big to fit in a normal-sized rider box. Now, immediately you ask, what is the size of a rider box? What can go in there? How do you determine how big things are? And that's the sort of core problem that we were looking at trying to solve here. Why are these important? So we've kind of already talked about the core pain point that we were trying to solve here. But as we started to dig into this, we found even more kind of lurking below the surface. So first one, kind of they're core to helping consumers understand that they can serve these mid-sized grocery baskets on our platform. The service profile of these orders were much worse than our normal orders. So around 8% absolute of the time, we were not getting these things to consumers within the window that we'd promised them. And then finally, to sort of top off the triumvirate of bad things about these orders, top customers, the most frequent and high-value consumers on our platform, were disproportionately ordering these kind of larger basket orders. And so you had something that was key to persuading consumers to use our platform more and to use them for different missions, with a terrible consumer service profile, and you had our top customers ordering them more than everyone. So we were sort of convinced, A, this is an important problem for us to solve, and B, this is an important problem for us to start solving now. And so priority case established, we started digging into how we might solve for this. First thing to do was to really get a clear picture of what was going wrong with the current proposition. And you can sort of see on the screen, we took a very basic approach to solve this historically with a heuristic of either this order has a certain number of items in it, or it's a certain price. That means that it's a large order. Now, you can immediately start seeing why this is a problem. Expensive sushi orders with a small box of items trigger that threshold. Small product but bought in large quantities, let's say single chocolate bars, might trigger that threshold. And so you got a whole bunch of kind of comical false positives in this scenario where we were sending out multiple riders to deliver things that didn't need that. So One of my favorite examples is our chief business officer ordered some sushi for him and his wife, and it got delivered in 2 cars. The second car obviously wasn't needed, and most of the first car wasn't needed either. So there were sort of some of these kind of hilarious edge cases that we built on to help trying to understand what we're actually solving for here. So we did all of that work to kind of understand the problem in more depth, built a set of kind of areas that we wanted to target, and then took a step back and said, all right, if we genuinely want to transform what we're doing in this space, we need to work back from a large consumer goal. So main goal that kind of we took as a team was to drive down the service profile of these orders to be in line with our regular orders. And I think kind of the thing that I should say here is that goal was on the stretchier side of credible at the time that we set it, right? And the philosophy with which we set goals is to say, let's set something which is on the stretchy side of credible, but bear in mind that we may only hit 70% of the goal. So I mean, this is a sort of key thing in goal setting is to make them as ambitious as possible, but with a strong degree of credibility, and to acknowledge that you're going to do what you can and do everything you can to go after it, but in a world where you're saying, you know, we've taken an ambitious goal and we're being realistic about our ability to hit it. So I think there's a sort of inherent tension in ambition and credibility with which you need to go after goals like that. And this was all kind of informed by our vision of what we wanted to do in this space, which was consumers can seamlessly order these things without it being a second thought in their mind. So what did we do to solve the problem? Really, it sort of broke down into 4 main areas. One was identification of these large orders. So how could we predict the bulk and the weight of these items? How could we use those identification parameters to actually assign riders or vehicles? How could we let consumers know what was happening in this space? And then, as we kind of scaled this, how might we go from multiple riders to a single vehicle with a sort of large cargo capacity? So sort of thinking broadly across 4 different vectors in how we solved this problem. We talked about a few different options for solving this initially, and kind of one of the first things you might say is, well, couldn't you just switch everything up so that you've got a whole load of larger format vehicles? You could definitely do that, but you'd be trading off other things to do that as well. So like, just to kind of bring this to life a little bit, imagine that all Deliveroo drivers in London suddenly kind of had cars and delivered using cars. You might get things delivered in one vehicle, but you would get them delivered significantly slower, right? You'd be making the traffic jams of the most congested city in the world significantly longer. And so there's a whole set of parameters around speed and customer service and quality that we had to think about when we're solving this problem. So first thing on identification of those large orders was to say, what's the right approach here? And broadly, there were 2. One was for items that were, had a known ground truth, let's say, a 330 ml bottle of Coke. We knew what the weight and bulk of those things were, and we could train our own internal machine learning models on them. Not the case for restaurant food on our platform, right? A vegan burger at the independent restaurant on the corner is not the same vegan burger as you might get at the independent restaurant on the next corner. And so we had to use a whole bunch of multimodal inputs for our AI-based models to kind of try and predict the bulk and weight of those kind of things. So sort of took a dual-pronged approach here. One was our own structured data. One was to use prompt-based AI identification. And that kind of is broadly how we approach solving identification. What we learned along the way was, particularly for grocery, knowing the bulk and weight of an item isn't enough to actually understand how it fits in a bag. There are multiple different ways of doing that. And so getting training data from our partners, be they restaurants, be they grocers, be they non-food partners, was a key way in helping us understand, actually, when we've identified the weight and bulk of something, how does it actually pack into a bag, and how does that help us understand whether it needs multiple riders? So we offered our partners the ability to feed back to us on where we'd got things wrong or where we'd got things right. Now, the next thing was to look at kind of how might we solve for scenarios where instead of a multi-rider approach, you could serve those orders using cars and large format vehicles as well. And so sort of key thing here to look at was, how do you do this in a way that doesn't excessively trade off speed, i.e. how do you improve the consumer experience by having all the things show up at the same time, but do so in a way that means that consumers get the best of both worlds, really. Things show up at the time that you've told them they will, but they also show up together. And so there was a whole bunch of work to think about how do we solve for this side of the problem as well. Then on to how we actually communicate this to customers. So prior to the team doing all of this work, you would only ever see one rider on the map, and you'd have no idea that the order was coming in multiple cargo boxes. And so showing that to consumers, opening up operational transparency into that was a key way of solving for this as well. And then you get to our outcomes. So solving this problem overall drove down those poor service outcomes, lates 5 minutes beyond our service promise, by 200 basis points. So to give everyone absolute percentages, it was down from 8% to below 6%. And kind of when we dug into those orders where we saw the most kind of juice here, it was those kind of long tail outcomes of bad predictions on sushi, on high value alcohol, where we saw the upside the most here. And so I think kind of like with that, we said, we've made a lot of progress here, but we need to continue going. We need to continue trying to solve the most ambiguous cases on the line between does this need multiple riders, does this not, and sort of keep on plugging away. And so to wrap up, when I reflect back now on what we've done so far and what we're continuing to do here, I think there's a few different learnings. The first one is to take a really ambitious goal when you've decided that something is one of your most critical priorities. And the way that I like to think about this is set a goal that is on the kind of intersection line between ambitious and credible, and be realistic about your ability to hit it. Don't constrain your ambition, but be realistic in the degree to which you might hit that. The second one is to combine quant data with what you see in the real world. So a bunch of the insights that informed how we solved this problem actually came from the team spending days, sitting in florists, sitting in restaurants, seeing the interaction between restaurants and riders, just as well as kind of looking at it from a macro perspective. And then I think finally kind of keep going, right? You get experimental learnings when you try and solve problems in a certain way, but they also derive fresh insights for you. And so when you've made some progress on a problem, keep on learning, keep on iterating on your approach, and keep on pressing ahead against that long-term goal. And that's me. Thanks, everybody.